11-year-old Valentina was set to return home to Mexico with her mother after treatment at a hospital in Philadelphia. Due to complications from spina bifida, the young girl was unable to walk. Around 6:10 p.m., she was lifted into the sky in a medical evacuation plane, and less than a minute later, it crashed straight into a crowded Philadelphia neighborhood on a Friday evening. The massive fireball from the explosion was captured by dozens of security cameras. Sadly, this won't be the only tragedy caught on video in this episode, and not even the worst one, so viewer discretion is advised. A wave of panic swept through Philadelphia's Castor Gardens neighborhood. Near Cottman Avenue and Roosevelt Boulevard, multiple buildings were in flames, and dozens more had been damaged. In the middle of the road, burning pieces of wreckage marked the site of the crash. The plane was headed to Tijuana, Mexico to bring a young Valentina home from continued treatment. Alongside her and her mother were 4 others: the captain, the co-pilot, a doctor, and a paramedic. None of them stood a chance in the firestorm of twisted metal. And tragically, they weren't the only victims. Stephen Druitt was on his way to the mall with his fiancée, Dominique, and their 9-year-old son, Ramesses, when suddenly the plane came crashing down right in front of their car. By some miracle, the mother and child managed to crawl out from the wreckage, but Stephen, unfortunately, didn't make it. He was killed instantly. When the chilling footage of the crash hit the news, Ramsey's grandmother froze. In one of the clips, she saw a small figure step out of the flames, and in that moment, she knew it was her grandson. The phone call came shortly after, confirming her worst fear. Ramesses was rushed to the hospital with burns covering 90% of his body. Andre Howard's day took the same tragic turn. He had taken his 10-year-old son, Trey, along with 2 other children, out for donuts. But their car also ended up directly in the blast zone of the falling wreckage. Andre quickly threw the car into reverse, while Trey shielded his little sister with his own body. Suddenly, Andre heard the sound of shattering glass right behind him. He turned around and saw the unthinkable. A massive shard of metal had burst through the rear window and hit Trey straight in the head. After a long surgery, Trey finally woke up in the hospital. The very first thing he asked was whether he had managed to save his little sister. Luckily, she was unharmed. And even better, Trey himself began to recover. The crash claimed 7 lives, but the cause of the accident is still unknown. Investigators hope to find the answers in the pilot's voice recorder, pulled from a crater nearly 2.5 meters deep. But what led to the next tragedy in our video was nothing but political ambition. On May 22, 2024, Mexican presidential candidate Jorge Alvarez Maínez was holding one of his final rallies of his campaign in San Pedro Garza. By evening, thousands of people had gathered at the baseball field where the event was scheduled. Some came to support Maínez. Others were there for local candidates running for senator or Congress. And many brought their kids just to enjoy the concert and entertainment. By 8 p.m., more than 10,000 people had packed in around the temporary stage. Some squeezed into the front rows, hoping to get a good look at the candidates, but what they saw instead was something horrible. A sudden, powerful gust of wind hit the stage, and in seconds, the entire construction came crashing down right onto the crowd. People were trapped beneath the heavy lighting rigs, others pinned under a massive video screen. Panic and chaos took over instantly. Some ran for their lives, trying to protect themselves or their loved ones. Others rushed to help those who were crushed under the wreckage. But there was only so much they could do on their own. While emergency crews rushed to the scene, some of the police officers and National Guard members already present at the rally jumped in to give first aid. By morning, the full scale of the tragedy had become clear. 213 people were injured, and dozens had to remain hospitalized. Moreover, 9 people lost their lives that day. But the total number didn't stop there. Weeks later, a 10th victim passed away in the hospital. And the most tragic part is that this accident could have been avoided. On the day of the rally, forecasters issued a storm warning with winds up to 70 kilometers an hour and even possible tornadoes in the region. But no one in charge of the rally paid attention. Furthermore, when the dust settled, not a single organizer was held accountable for the deaths of 10 innocent people. And, sadly, situations like this happen more often than you think. On August 22, 2015, the Shoreham Airport in West Sussex was set to host its annual airshow, a massive event people looked forward to all year. Some even left work early just to catch the high-flying aerobatics. Meanwhile, life in the nearby town carried on as usual until everything changed in a single moment. 76-year-old driver Maurice Abrahams was on his way to pick up a bride on her wedding day. Meanwhile, 23-year-olds Jacob Schilt and Matthew Grimstone, midfielders for Worthing United Football Club, were heading out to prepare for a match. None of them could have known that right above their heads, pilot Andy Hill was beginning a loop maneuver in a vintage Hawker Hunter T-7 jet. Hill, a former RAF pilot known as the Professor, pulled the jet into a steep vertical climb, then dove into a loop. But something went wrong. He kept the nose down too long, and within seconds, it was clear this wasn't just a routine maneuver. The jet suddenly slammed into the ground and exploded. And just as the terrified spectators began to process the shock, a new wave of panic set in because the fireball was rising right above the nearby highway. No one in the crowd could see what was happening just beyond the airport. Two cyclists were riding to meet friends. Right at the moment, the jet slammed into the road near them. The blast was so powerful that the car carrying driver Maurice Abrahams and the two young footballers was caught nearly at the epicenter. Unfortunately, neither the cyclists Dylan Archer and Richard Smith, nor the people in the car survived the crash. And they weren't the only ones. 6 more people who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time also lost their lives. In total, 11 people became victims of this horrible accident. Yet, the pilot, despite suffering serious injuries, survived. Investigators later concluded that Pilot Air had caused the crash, so he was charged with 11 counts of manslaughter for gross negligence. But a few years later, the court fully acquitted him, and the Shoreham airshow was never held again. Sadly, you never see disaster coming until it's already too late. In 1983, the quiet town of Benton, Tennessee had no clue what was unfolding right under their noses. Until the morning of May 27th, when a massive explosion rocked a nearby farm. The blast echoed for over 30 kilometers, with a towering cloud of smoke and ash rising nearly 240 meters into the sky. And when the first investigator arrived at the scene, he froze. It looked like someone had dropped a 200-kilogram bomb right in the middle of a quiet Tennessee farm. The 2-story barn that once stood on the farm had been shattered to pieces. The explosion uprooted trees within a 90-meter radius, and debris scattered twice as far. That's when local residents and police discovered the farm had secretly been used to manufacture and store fireworks. Moreover, nearby they also found a stash of 172 boxes of unexploded pyrotechnics and 6 barrels of chemical explosives. However, the most tragic discovery they made was the remains of 11 people. It turned out the victims had all been employees of the illegal factory, and many of them were family members of Dan Lee Webb, the man who ran it all. He and 21 others involved were eventually brought to justice, but the exact cause of the deadly explosion was never determined. One thing, however, is clear. Fireworks can be extremely dangerous, and nothing made that clearer than the catastrophic accident at SE Fireworks in Enschede, Netherlands. The company was founded in the 1970s and became a major success. Over time, a residential neighborhood grew around the factory, and by 2000, SE Fireworks had become the country's main supplier of pyrotechnics for public celebrations and music events. The company had a clean safety record and passed all the required inspections. But on May 13th, everything changed. A fire broke out inside the central building of SE Fireworks, and within moments, it reached nearly a ton of fireworks, ready to blow. People panicked and scattered in every direction, trying to escape, but it felt like fireworks were exploding from every corner. And that wasn't even the worst part. At 3:35 p.m., a massive explosion tore through the area with a blast equivalent to 5 tons of TNT. The explosion flattened an entire neighborhood. 400 houses were completely destroyed, and more than 1,500 others were damaged. But the worst part is that around 950 people were injured, and 23 lost their lives. Investigators later discovered that SE Fireworks had been illegally storing 177 tons of fireworks. And the penalty? Just 1 year in prison and a €2,250 fine for each of the 2 managers. Honestly, I don't even know what to say. If you do, feel free to share it in the comments. Meanwhile, let's move on to the next story, which took place in Kolkata, India, on March 31st, 2016. That morning in Kolkata's Girish Park, life was unfolding on 2 levels at once. Up above, construction crews were working on an overpass that was already 6 years behind schedule. While down below, the streets were full of people going about their day. Workers had just poured a fresh layer of concrete on one of the sections when they heard a sharp cracking sound. But nothing seemed wrong, so they kept working. Meanwhile, a man named Golap Mali had just finished delivering wedding invitations for his son. He returned to a small shop beneath the overpass, and at exactly 12:40 p.m., as he shut the door behind him, the unthinkable happened. The overpass suddenly collapsed. In an instant, hundreds of people were trapped in their cars and inside buildings along the road, buried under the weight of a 150-meter stretch of concrete. The scale of the disaster was so massive that authorities mobilized every emergency unit they had to help with the rescue and debris removal, and Baika Salih, Golap's son, was just one of many people desperately running around, hoping to find his father alive. But the destruction was so severe, there was little anyone could do without proper equipment. Rescue crews worked day and night, but the chances of finding anyone alive got slimmer with every passing hour. In the end, 27 people were confirmed dead and dozens were injured. When authorities launched an investigation, they discovered that the overpass had been built by a construction company already blacklisted in multiple Indian states, mostly for using substandard materials. And that's exactly what caused the unfinished overpass to collapse in Kolkata. 5 executives from the construction company were charged, but at the time of this video's release, the trial is still ongoing, and no one has been held accountable for the lives lost. Sadly, there are places in the world where simply living is dangerous because they're located in active war zones. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is one of those places where ordinary roads are too dangerous to use due to ongoing armed clashes between government forces and rebel groups. For example, the route between the cities of Goma and Minova is considered so risky that more and more people are turning to Lake Kivu as a safe means of transportation. On October 3, 2024, Nuru Alpha was eagerly waiting for his large family to arrive exactly by water. 12 of his relatives had boarded a double-decker ferry in Minova to make their way back home to Goma. But they weren't the only ones on board. More and more people kept getting on until the ferry was packed to more than 3 times its intended capacity. Only then did it finally set off. As it neared the port just 700 meters from shore, local fishermen on Lake Kivu noticed the vessel dangerously tilting toward the water. Then, in an instant, the ferry vanished beneath the surface. Seconds before it went down, passengers started panicking and scrambled to find life jackets. But there were none, and most on board didn't even know how to swim. Nero Alpha was one of the first to hear the devastating news. Panicked and desperate, Nero Alpha searched the crowd at the port, begging for any word about his family. But the updates were devastating. Rescue teams managed to pull about 40 survivors from the water, and far more bodies. At first, officials reported 78 dead. Later, the number was revised to 87. Out of Nuru's 12 family members, only 3 made it to the hospital. 2 were confirmed dead, and the fate of the remaining 7 remains unknown. It turned out the ferry, which was designed to carry 80 passengers, had at least 278 on board. But no one knows the exact number for sure, or how many just disappeared without a trace. Still, the investigation pointed to the obvious. The tragedy was a direct result of massive overcrowding. And, sadly, this wasn't the first accident of its kind, and it definitely won't be the last. In 2019, Lake Kivu claimed more than 150 lives when an overloaded wooden boat capsized. Authorities promised to enforce safety regulations, requiring all water transport to be equipped with life jackets. But, unfortunately, nothing changed. As you've likely realized by now, the worst accidents take place when safety rules are ignored, and the ones who suffer most are often those who never saw it coming. For Revin and Hanin from Iraq, this was supposed to be the beginning of their life together, celebrated in style at a lavish wedding with over 1,000 guests. Cameras captured their first dance, which ended with a dramatic burst of fireworks shooting up in the columns around the couple. But as the dance ended, flaming flowers began to fall from above. Then, in an instant, the entire ceiling was on fire, right above the heads of 1,000 guests. The fire spread quickly through the flammable decorations, and just as massive panic erupted, the lights went out. No one knew which way to turn. There were no fire extinguishers, no marked emergency exits, just pure panic and flames everywhere. The number of injured overwhelmed nearby hospitals. Burn victims arrived in waves, some with half their bodies scorched, others beyond saving. Rivin and Hanin made it out alive, but the groom lost 15 members of his family. and in total, 107 people lost their lives that night. Even though the wedding hall owner was sentenced to 10 years in prison for violating fire safety regulations, that did little to comfort those who lost their loved ones forever. A similar tragedy unfolded in the Russian city of Perm. On the night of December 5, 2009, the local elite had gathered to celebrate the 8th anniversary of the Lame Horse nightclub. But instead of the permitted 50 guests, nearly 300 people packed inside. And when, as part of the entertainment, the fireworks lit up the low ceiling, flames suddenly erupted. Thick, choking smoke from burning plastic quickly filled the club, and all 300 guests rushed toward the only narrow exit. Those caught in the middle were trampled, while those at the back were swallowed by fire. And even many of the people who did make it outside wouldn't survive their injuries. Many survivors ended up nearly naked in the 17 degrees Celsius night air. So, some of them died of hypothermia long before medics could arrive. However, most of the victims succumbed to smoke inhalation and flames, bringing the final death toll to 156 people. All because the club was operating illegally and safety checks had been quietly erased with bribes. You can't control everything around you, but if you ever find yourself in a place that clearly breaks every safety rule, don't wait for something terrible to happen and get out while you still can.